The world of private investigators. Everybody says they want to hire one. No one really knows what they do. We're going to dive in with Hal Humphreys today and talk about the scandalous and sexy world of private investigation. Welcome back, everybody, to #Lawyered. We've got the A-team here, Andrea and myself, and today we're going to be talking about the world of private investigators. And this is a topic that a lot of people, like many of our topics on this show, think they know a lot about, but really
not so much.
There's a lot more to it. And honestly, lawyers themselves, as our guests will talk about here in a second, they misinterpret what a PI can do, what he or she can't do. And so we really think it's good to educate our listeners about what this world really entails.
Absolutely. And lawyers, don't tune out. This is also for you. You should know this too.
And let me introduce our guest. We've got Hal Humphreys here from Nashville, Tennessee, one of my favorite speakers at conferences. He's always entertaining, part of the reason we wanted to have him here on our show. And so, Hal, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
And Hal's got over 30 years of experience in the PI world. And again, private investigator, PI, that's where the interchange comes from. And Hal, you're the owner of Find Investigations. You're a certified private investigator. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I know you've got a number of other ventures, and I'd rather, instead of me butchering them, I'd love for you to just tell our listeners a little bit about some of the other companies that you're working on right now in your world.
So I tend to be a little bit on the frenetic side when it comes to work. I have a PI agency, which is basically me and an assistant, and that keeps me fairly busy. In addition to that, I run a business with my business partner, Jim McLeod, here in Nashville, called Storyboard EMP, and the EMP stands for Education Media Partners. We have a continuing education platform for private investigators, real estate appraisers, real estate agents, basically any of the kind of mid-level professional designations or licenses that require continuing education to maintain your license.
Okay, awesome. And how long have you been running that company?
We started the company about almost 10 years ago.
Okay. And, of course, right before we went on the air, I said I was going to bring this up. Hal also has his own podcast called Taking The P.I.S. It's profane, irreverent, and snarky. And he, along with his co-host Reagan Wynn, who's one of my favorite criminal defense lawyers in Texas, really delve into some stories. And they're kind of doing some of the same things that we're doing here at #Lawyered and trying to really expose some of the underbelly of the justice system. Hal, tell us a little bit about, well, first off, where did the name come from? But then I'd love to hear about the podcast itself, too.
Yeah, please do. That's a very creative name.
So Reagan is a big fan of the movie, what's it called? Oh, shoot, it just slipped my mind. Animal House, where one of the guys is described as being profane, irreverent, and snarky, and that resonated with Reagan. And if you've ever heard Reagan Wynn speak at a conference or even spent any time with Reagan, you will know without a doubt he is profane, irreverent, and snarky.
Absolutely.
And I tend to fall into that same category, maybe not quite as snarky, but I'm certainly profane and irreverent. Anyway, Reagan and I have worked together for several years now. We've tried a couple of cases together, and he is one of the smartest attorneys I've ever worked with. He is a pugilist. He will fight tooth and nail for his clients, and that's one of the reasons I like working for him. So when he asked me to be a part of this podcast, I jumped on it. I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And the description he gave me was, we're going to interview people and we're going to talk to, attorneys and judges and citizens who have been accused and spent time in jail and prison, and really get to some kind of deep criminal justice issues. And we've had a good time with it so far.
Yeah, and I got to say, some of my favorite episodes are the ones where you talk to men and women who've actually served time or were accused and went through the entire process. And I would tell everybody, go check it out. It's called Taking The P.I.S, P.I.S. Go check it out, because it really does open your eyes to some of these people, and you see what the other side, what it looks like. We as lawyers get to be on the side of fighting for our clients, but you get to hear about what was going through their heads and what they actually experienced. And so go check that out for sure, and definitely check out Hal's other ventures. So Hal, I want to jump right into this. And again, like we said at the beginning, there's a lot of people that have a lot of misconceptions about private investigators, what they can do, what they can't do, how cool the job is, how all that stuff works. So I guess probably the first question I want to ask you is, in your experience, what is the biggest myth that you hear people think about private investigators?
I think the biggest problem with the industry is the misconceptions stem from the early post-war novels of private investigators back in the day, and television. People think I have a Ferrari or a gold Firebird.
A what?
A gold Firebird.
Oh, come on, Andrea.
I'm showing my age.
Now, I know what you're talking about, but I mean, real quick, a little brief aside. How usually I'm the one that doesn't know what's going on in this podcast because Andrea is more well versed on current events, things like that. So this is a nice moment. This is a first,
and Austin is really enjoying it. So
yeah, so the Ferrari and certainly the gold Firebird are not current events. The gold Firebird comes from Jim Rockford, and that was a lot of people's first introduction to the PI world. And then, of course, the Ferrari comes from Magnum PI.
Right.
A lot of people think that all private investigators are alcoholics, and that very well may be true. But I would argue that I'm a high-functioning alcoholic, so it's okay. Mm-hmm. They think that all private investigators carry guns and lockpick sets and baseball bats. And, most of the private investigators I know do not carry guns. They certainly don't carry lockpick sets. And, I know some of them carry baseball bats, but it's because they play baseball in their off time.
So not even a bobby pin set like Betty from Riverdale to pick anything?
No. If I'm picking a lock, I'm getting you in trouble.
Well, I think that there's probably a lot of ideas that people are sneaking on rooftops and going through window ledges and peering into windows or hanging out in trees with binoculars. And I would assume that that's not something you do on a regular basis.
No, and here's the thing. I mean, I do surveillance work on occasions. I'm not a big fan of doing surveillance work, but I have several friends in the business across the country that are experts in that work, and they love the work. And there certainly are some private investigators out there who will break that veil of curtilage and invade someone's sense of privacy to get documentation. Most of the PIs I know won't do anything like that. If you've got to stand on a box to look over the fence, it's not good video. There are plenty of things you can catch people doing out in public that are, proof of, they're not actually injured, or they are in fact shagging that woman.
Okay, well, I'm so glad you brought this up, right? Not the shagging the woman part, but the curtilage situation. So for those people who are not lawyers or PIs, curtilage is the area immediately surrounding the house. You typically see it in a criminal defense context. However, I am very curious because in the PI shows that I watch, which admittedly are much more girly and funny and not like actually Magnum PI level, it's the girl from the OC and it's hilarious. Anyway, but they do have like these paparazzi level cameras, and they'll be like doing a stakeout in the car, and the lens is like longer than my arm, and they're taking pictures through the window of the person like walking around just fine or getting it on hot and heavy with the pool girl or whatever. So how accurate is that to real PI life? I'm guessing maybe not the most accurate.
It's not the most accurate. I will say this. Kind of the rule of thumb that private investigators use, and I always tell people when I'm teaching classes, if you're a private investigator, you should have an attorney that you can call and ask for advice, for legal advice, and I recommend that they get a letter from their attorney about specific issues and put it in the file. But the rule of thumb is if I can see it from the street, if I can see it from a public place, it is perfectly fair game for me to take video of that. So in Nashville, and I'm in Dallas as well, that long lens is only going to get you so much. it's just 300 feet away. It's really hard to see any detail on anything. Most of the cameras we use for surveillance are going to be handycams, like Sony handycams. There's a new product out called Psionics night vision camera this is one of those cases where being a PI is so cool that it's ridiculous. But this thing, the first time I turned it on, I was like, holy cow, it's crazy. It's got this kind of colored night vision. It's not that standard green that you usually see like my backdrop here. It's full color night vision, and if there's any light source around, this camera will take it and work with it, and it's just amazing. So we had a guy in a webinar a couple of weeks ago, a private investigator, who has used this camera on infidelity cases, and literally the man and the woman in question, it was a guy and his paramour, were in the car, in the back seat, in the back of a parking lot. It was totally dark back there. But with this camera, there was just enough ambient light that he was able to get a full, clear, full color vision of, activity.
See, now
Wow.
that's a tool that if I have one of those, and this is how you don't have to answer this question because of your professional ethics, but I think I would be telling all my clients, oh yeah, we definitely need to use this because we need to get some road work out of this machine here. That's awesome.
Yeah, and the fun thing about that little camera, and I don't mean to be plugging the camera, but I am, because
And this is not paid, right?
Right, this
not
is-
an ad,
this is not paid.
supported. Okay.
I think the camera's like $700. It's really affordable, and it's
Yeah.
a fantastic little tool, and it's about the same form factor as a Sony Handycam. That said, the Sony Handycams and some of the JVC and Pioneer Handycams have really good low light characteristics, so you can get really good video in really low light situations with those cameras. That said, the last time I did a surveillance job was about a year and a half ago, and I used this one piece of kit that I have with me at all times, and it's this.
Your
The
iPhone.
iPhone. I got every bit of video on the iPhone and documented everything on the iPhone. And at the end of the day, it's one of the most useful tools for private investigators.
Again, not supported by Apple, I presume.
No,
They should probably consider sponsoring you.
they should.
Well, I mean, think about it. And again, not to get off on a tangent, but we like to have fun on this show. I mean, the whole shot on iPhone 11 for a PI case, that's perfect. That's the ultimate endorsement of, you can use this to surveil somebody. That's fantastic.
Oh gosh.
I had
Well,
I had a child custody case a couple of years ago where the wife was bringing the child to the meeting with her boyfriend to do the exchange, and she was not supposed to be doing that. And the husband had noticed it and had mentioned it to his attorney, but they couldn't really do anything with it because they have an independent third party verifying it. So I had my iPhone up to my ear as if I were taking a call, out in the parking lot, just walking around like I was involved in this heated, drama-filled conversation, and
Ooh,
and
I love
videotaped the wife with her boyfriend coming in to do the thing. So, it's the bulk of surveillance work is not what you think of, like the covert hiding in the bushes kind of stuff.
Right.
So it's sneaky and devious. I'm loving this. Sneaky and devious.
Yes.
Clever.
Well, and so how that actually brings me to my next question. I mean, we've talked about some of the things that people think PIs do versus, what's unrealistic. What is a typical job, and what does a PI actually do? What are some things that you can actually help a lawyer when putting together a case with?
So the bulk of my work is criminal defense work, and the absolute overwhelming majority of that work is identifying, locating, and interviewing witnesses. And that's where I spend most of my time. And that work there's nothing sneaky about it. There's nothing covert or surreptitious about it. It is straight up, I will knock on someone's door and introduce myself, identify myself, tell them who I'm working for, and tell them I need to talk to you about this thing, whatever it happens to be, and have to use charm and good looks to get a foot in the door, and I'm batting about 500 there. So the work, literally, like 85 to 90% of my work is reviewing discovery, identifying witnesses, and then trying to locate those people and talk to them. One of the one of the biggest misconceptions about private investigators, and this happens in the criminal side as well as the domestic and insurance side, where people are doing more surveillance work, is, in divorce cases, people are very interested a lot of times in their partner's financial situation. And a lot of people think that private investigators can research and verify bank records and account balances and those kind of things. And if a private investigator says they can do that, they're wrong. And if they do it, be careful with that evidence.
Right.
There are some very strict rules about what you can and cannot get without the permission of the consumer, as far as bank accounts and credit records.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's one of the biggest problems. Like there are investigators out there that will do that work. I just think that it's pretty suspect if you actually get bank account information. I don't know how you would use it in a courtroom situation.
Right, right.
So I had a question. So in our episode, the last episode that we did, in our closing arguments, we brought up the fact that a boyfriend had put who is in a troubled relationship, apparently, with his girlfriend, I guess. I don't know. Maybe
Girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, whatever.
Whatever. It's so flowy these days. Anyway, apparently he allegedly stuck a tracking device on the bottom of her car. Now, I'm guessing that was her car and title was in her name, and I'm pretty sure he didn't buy it for her. Anyways, listeners, fact check me. If you did, then, eat my words. But in that situation, can you do that? Is there a problem there? Do you do that? How are GPS devices involved?
So the rules on using GPS trackers vary state by state. I am not a fan of GPS trackers. I think they make for lazy surveillance. I think, if you have a tracker on someone's car and that car goes to, I don't know, a gentleman's club, if you're not there watching them, how do you know they were driving that car? How do you know who was in the car? How do you know what I'm saying? You can't verify anything.
Right.
Number one, and the reason I say it's lazy surveillance, I worked on a case several years ago, where an investigator put a tracker on a car, and she had hired 6 investigators to help her out on this case. And the theory was we were all going to sit at different locations and kind of watch for the guy coming, and she was going to sit in her office and watch the map of the dot of him moving around. It ended up 6 investigators in a convoy behind this guy, and her calling at the turns on a map, and it was just ridiculous. I think for surveillance to be valid, an investigator needs to be there. They need to have eyes on the subject. They need to know ahead of time where they're most likely to go, and I think trackers are just lazy in that form. The second thing is, if you don't have the owner's permission to put a tracker on a car, I would be very, very careful doing that. In Tennessee, I know there are some cases where people have gotten in really big trouble for that. In South Carolina and North Carolina, I think they're a little bit more lenient on those things, but it varies state by state. I don't like them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in Texas they're actually pretty strict about them, because I had that come up once before, and I actually had a PI involved in that case, and he told me, he's like, yeah, unless the car belongs to the husband, I was representing the husband, he's like, I'm not putting a tracker on there. I was like, great, I thought that was illegal, so I'm glad you're not going to do that.
About 5 years ago, I had a case where the opposing party had a private investigator, and we both knew that the other one was working the other side of the case. We're friends, but we professionally sometimes do that spy versus spy thing.
Very James Bondy of you.
She had put a tracker on my client's car, and I knew she was prone to doing that, so I searched the car, took it to a shop, searched the car, found the tracker, and I'm a private pilot, and the guy who taught me to fly is now the chief pilot for Dollar General. So I took the tracker and hooked it up to a 9-volt battery and gave it to Volker, and he flew it all over the country, which was pretty fun.
Gosh.
That's awesome.
What a hoot.
That's a great idea.
I'm going to remember that one from now on.
Well, Hal, so you mentioned earlier that one of your big jobs is to track down witnesses and interview them. And, we get asked all the time as lawyers, hey, can you find people? How do you do that? What are some of the techniques you use to actually locate people if you don't have a good address, a good phone number?
I can't tell you that. I've presented on this topic a number of times. You may have been, Austin, you may have been in one of the Rusty Duncan seminars when I talked about this a little bit. One of the superpowers that private investigators have is we have access to some databases that are pretty fantastic. There are two that come to mind. One is called IDI Core. It's a relatively new database on the market, and the other one is TLO, which is a TransUnion product. And those databases, if I have, first name, last name, and some other personal identifier, and it could even just be like a city name, I can usually find somebody using those resources. Barring that, if it's somebody that's 18 or 19 years old and there's not a lot of information floating around about them out there, I have found, social media is incredibly helpful in locating people. And then if someone is on the upper end of the scale of age, like myself, maybe they don't have a whole lot of record in the databases, but they might own property in different states and around the country. And, you can go, you can dive deep into the research process to find someone. But I have had real good luck using tax assessor records across the country. And that's totally publicly available and anybody can do it. It's just, the superpower is knowing where to look and knowing which databases to access.
I gotcha. And you've mentioned, that you work predominantly criminal defense cases. You do some domestic cases, do some insurance cases. In your experience using a PI, is there a certain area of the law that you think is more effective or can use a PI more effectively than the others?
Yeah, so kind of in those three scenarios, for the criminal defense side, I think by and large, the best way to use a private investigator is in locating and interviewing witnesses. A lawyer has a duty to investigate a case. If they don't investigate the case, there could be some serious IAC claims there, IOC claims, ineffective assistance of counsel. And I think if you're doing criminal defense, if it's a private pay case, talk to your client about hiring a private investigator to interview witnesses. Sometimes you can use investigators to go out and kind of check crime scenes and sight lines and stuff like that. But the biggest results are going to come from interviewing witnesses. For domestic cases, I don't know about Texas. I know Tennessee is a no-fault divorce state, meaning, we just don't like each other anymore, so we're going to get divorced. That's almost always because husband stepped out on wife or wife stepped out on husband. But theoretically, the state of Tennessee doesn't care who's sleeping with who. So I'm not sure if you're going to trial on a divorce case that surveillance video of your partner having sex or going out with another person is going to be terribly useful. But I have seen it be really, really useful in mediation. When the person who has been under surveillance doesn't really know they've been under surveillance, and they're maintaining, no, I'm not seeing that guy, that's not happening. And then you come out with some videos showing them that it's pretty much irrefutable that you have been. The negotiations change pretty significantly at that point.
Especially if it's night vision camera, that changes things big time, right?
In full color, yeah.
Well, and you mentioned insurance defense cases, and I know what you mean by that, but and you kind of made a comment earlier about whether the person's injured or not. Can you kind of explain to our listeners how a private investigator helps in a personal injury type of case?
So a lot of insurance cases are the insurance cases I've worked have been medical malpractice, and straight up someone has filed a workers' compensation claim. And there's a lot for private investigators that do surveillance work. That's where the bulk of their business comes from. In those cases, a person has usually claimed that they cannot do a certain range of activities. Be it like if they work in a warehouse, they say, I can't lift anything over 40 pounds, or I can't make this motion, or I can't walk any, whatever. And if you can catch that person in the backyard with their kid, throwing him up in the air and catching him and, playing catch with him, or playing basketball, or whatever activity they're doing at home. I've got one case several years ago, an insurance fraud case, where this guy lived out in the Tules here in Tennessee and claimed he couldn't work, but we had, I don't know, about 6 hours of video of this guy out splitting wood with an axe and a wedge. It's like, if you can do that, you could probably do the work at the warehouse. So that's the kind of thing that private investigators look for in those cases. And in those cases, it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I have a question. What is the spiciest investigation you've ever done?
The spiciest investigation. Mm-hmm. Man.
I know, I'm not here asking the hard questions. Heavy hitting.
The craziest call I ever got as an investigator, do you guys remember the band Sixpence None the Richer?
Oh, yeah.
No.
It's in that song Kiss Me, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm not going to sing it. But yeah.
Under the bearded barley, all that business. Anyway, the lead singer for that band, Lee Nash, is a friend of ours, and she apparently one night got it in her head that she was going to prank call me. And they called and claimed to be a very wealthy family in the music business. The implication was it was one of the Richie family, like Lionel Richie's daughter, but nobody actually said any names. Mm-hmm. Anyway, said, I know he's stepping out on me. I know he's in this hotel. Can you get over there and get video right now? We'll pay you. It's not a problem. It was like 3:00 in the morning.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, seriously, number one, how'd you get my number? Number two, I can't just get up and go out. She says, look, we'll give you a credit card. We'll pay you straight away. And it'll be $5,000. And I'm thinking, all right, well, maybe. And I said, hang on a second. And I got up, did a little bit of research, and she called back and she said, I really need POP. And I said, I'm sorry, what? And she said, I've got to have POP. And I'm like, I don't know what do you mean POP? And she said, proof of penetration.
Oh my gosh.
Got the 3-letter acronym for it. That's perfect. Yeah.
And at that point, I was like, okay, and just hung up. But apparently they were on a roll, and they called several private investigators in Nashville that night, did the same thing.
Lord. Oh, my gosh.
That's pretty funny. Well, that actually segues to one of my questions I was going to ask.
Austin.
What do you think is not the proof penetration part, but, what's one of the more, and I'm going to use danger with quotes, what's one of the more, like, dangerous or confrontational investigation stories you've been a part of?
I have had a gun pulled on me twice in this business, and it usually happens when you're comfortable and let your guard down. I had a case I was working on several years ago with the Federal Defender's Office, and one of the witnesses, this involved several white supremacist organizations and a young man who had been accused of murder and convicted of murder. Anyway, there was one witness that they wanted me to talk to that was a high school guidance counselor of this young man. And she just happened to live in West Tennessee, about 20 miles north of my hometown. And I thought, well, this is right in my backyard. I'll go spend the weekend with my mom and dad. It'll be easy. It's a guidance counselor, no big deal. I have a process that I use when I go to approach a witness. And that is, I'll walk up to the front door and knock on the door 10 times. Some of my friends call it the cop knock, but I knock, pretty aggressively 10 times on the door. And then I step back and we'll count to 60. After that, I'll knock 5 times, step back and count to 30. If nobody comes to the door, I leave. Well, this time I got to knock number 5 and the door flung open. And there was this skinny, hayseed redneck man in cut off shorts and a .45 caliber handgun. And he puts it right in my face. And I said, I've got a kind of a spiel I do. I said, I'm Hal Humphreys. I'm a private investigator. I'm trying to get in touch with. And he said, I don't care who you are. Get the hell off my property.
Oh, my gosh.
And he cocked that .45 caliber handgun. And I keep a recorder in my pocket, the breast pocket of my blazer when I'm working. And it's anytime I'm approaching a witness, I have the recorder going. I put my hands up. I said, I'm sorry, I'm leaving. And I backed out of the garage. My heart rate was out the roof. I got in the car, turned on the car, and drove straight to the courthouse, called the attorneys that I worked for, kind of ran the situation down with them. Everybody calmed down. I calmed down. That night when I got home, I pulled my recorder and plugged it in to download the audio, and I had done some other interviews that afternoon, and I remembered the audio from that, so I just played it, and the entire thing played out. It was like, I don't care who you are, get the hell off my property, I'm backing out, sorry, won't bother you again. And I didn't remember this part, but I got in the car, turned it on, and said, well, that didn't go very well, did it?
That's the first conference I ever saw you speak at, you played that recording.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
So do
and
you have a bulletproof vest that you wear at any point? Or?
I don't.
Okay, I've been watching too much Yellowstone then.
Yeah. Great show. The way I approach the business is I tend to think that most people on this earth are good people and want to do the right thing. And if somebody wants to shoot at me, they're going to have to hit a moving target that is running in a serpentine fashion. I had it. You'll get a kick out of this being from Texas. Had a witness that lived outside of Abilene, and the property was, I don't know, maybe 10 acres, really narrow lot, mesquite run back in there. And then at the very back of the property is a missile silo.
A missile silo?
Yeah, an abandoned missile silo.
Because why not, right?
Because why not? Anyway, I go back there. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, okay, missile silo. Wow, that's a new one.
Yeah, so I go back there, and there's a double wide trailer, and it's it's well maintained. It looks nice. And I knock on the door, and this absolutely gorgeous tow-headed kid opens the door and says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'm looking for so-and-so." He goes, "She ain't here right now." He shuts the door and goes inside, and 20 seconds later, the door flings open, and the towhead's dad is standing in the door with a 20 gauge. It was a Winchester 20 gauge pump action. And he racked one in, and that alone wouldn't scare me so much because I think that's just kind of a Texas hello. But the thing that terrified me was his good blue eye was staring right at me. His bad, cloudy, kind of gray eye was looking somewhere off in the distance over here. The dude looked insane, and it scared the absolute bejesus out of me. And I can't help myself. As I'm walking back to my car, I get about 50 yards away from it, and I said, "Do you know where she is?"
Oh, no.
And he said, "Get out of here now," and I did. But yeah, I don't wear a vest. I have a knife-proof shirt that I have worn on occasions, and it's basically just a really thin chainmail thing that you put underneath your normal clothes. But the problem with wearing a handgun that is visible and a vest that is bulletproof, it just creates a barrier between me and the witness, and there's no real conversation that's going to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense because, I mean, you're probably if you show up looking that way, they're probably thinking law enforcement, and it just changes the dynamic.
Sure, and the minute they find out you're not law enforcement, they either think you're Dog the Bounty Hunter or you're a cop wannabe, and that changes the dynamic. I think it's what I'm looking for in an interview with a witness is not to grill them for specific answers. I'm looking for them to tell me a story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Hal, we've really loved talking with you today and hearing some of your war stories. That's again, like I told you on the call, that was one of the big things we were looking forward to, and really enjoy hearing kind of what a private investigator actually can do on the scene. Although I wasn't expecting the night vision camera, that was definitely a treat for me.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a fun little toy.
Well, Hal, thank you very much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. I know our listeners are going to enjoy learning more about your profession. And stay tuned for our closing arguments. We're going to talk about the hashtag Stand With Sophie custody battle that's here in Frisco, Texas. But until next time, we're hashtag lawyered.
Bye, y'all. Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to Hashtag Lawyer today. But wait, before you go, we want to make sure that you know where to find us on all the socials. So catch up with us on the audiovisual portion on YouTube. We have a Hashtag Lawyer channel there that we're very excited for you to take a look at if you want to put some faces to names. I know I love doing that. Make sure to follow us on our Instagrams, whether it be the Hashtag Lawyered Instagram or Austin's and my personal Instagrams. We check all three, so make sure to DM us or frankly leave comments on all of our latest posts to make sure that we're covering the topics that you guys are interested in. And if you have any questions or you're like, hey, I heard this in the news today, I think it's really interesting. I kind of want you and Austin to break it down for me and give the legal perspective so that I am well equipped at my next dinner party or Zoom cocktail hour, COVID and all that, to be able to discuss this with my friends. So again, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to rate and review the podcast on whatever platform that you're listening to. And we are so thankful that you're listening, and tune back in next week. Bye, y'all.
Today on Closing Arguments, we're talking about hashtag Stand With Sophie, a 9-year-old girl in Frisco, Texas, caught in the middle of a custody battle and a social media campaign, as well as rumors of some overblown allegations. Sophie's a 9-year-old girl. She's in Frisco, Texas, and her father, Michael Long, and her mother are in the middle of a vicious custody battle going back and forth. Her father launched a viral campaign on YouTube when he published a video of her being yanked from his car by his ex's mother. He then escalated the stakes of this fight by making allegations that Sophie was being sexually abused by her mother's fiance and a number of other men. Social media went wild with hashtags, retweets, reposts, and even a GoFundMe account to try to gather money for Mr. Long's fight for Sophie. The court eventually granted a temporary full conservatorship right to the father, and now, in the aftermath of all of this drama, there's rumors circulating that Mr. Long is being sued by YouTube influencers for greatly exaggerating the abuse Sophie actually suffered, just to keep this campaign going and to keep making money off of it. Whatever's happened at this point, we need to know more. We encourage you to go check this out, keep following this story, and DM us. Let us know what you find out. Let us know what you want to know about it so we can continue to cover this event as it progresses.